This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female. Tansei, hello, and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Olette Stonechild, and I'm very excited and honored to have my friend Adeline Bird here with me today. She's an Afro-Indigenous writer, director. She's a member of Treaty 4 Territory Rolling River First Nations. However, she was born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and she currently resides in Toronto. She's the host and the founder of the Soul Unexpected podcast, and she's the author of the book Be Unapologetically You, a self-love guide for women of color. I met Adeline a couple years ago now on the set of CW and CBC's Trickster, and we have been friends ever since. So without further ado, Adeline Bird, hi. Tansei, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm very excited to have Adeline here with me today. I met Adeline, like a couple years ago. I feel like a couple years ago.
Yes.
She was on set for my brother's CBC series, Trickster, and so there I was introduced to Adeline and her work, and I've been inspired and a fan ever since. So Adeline, hi, thank you so much for being here. If you just want to introduce yourself, where you're from, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Miigwech for having me, Shayla. So as Shayla mentioned, my name is Adeline Bird. I am Afro-Anishnabe from Winnipeg, Manitoba. As I always say, the biggest urban reserve. I am a proud member of Rolling River First Nations. And I grew up in Winnipeg, in the West End, and have always basically loved media. I grew up in the hood, so I never had access to, we never went to the beach, we didn't have a car. We never went to cabins. We didn't have that. So I spent a lot of my time on the weekends and when I had downtime listening to the radio, listening to cassettes, watching movies, you know what I mean? Really just delving into multimedia in every shape or form. And so interestingly enough, I found myself now doing the work that I'm doing. And I'm still figuring that out. I'm still figuring out what that looks like, because I'm not really a fan of the structure of the current media system. So I'm not really working in it right now, but really trying to help, I guess, guide the people working inside these spaces. But I honestly it's where we're going in the world is so fascinating. And I never would have imagined, if you would have told me last year this time that, Adeline, you're going to move to Toronto and you're going to go and just do your thing out there, I would have been like, okay, yeah, right. You're going to get a dog. I would have been like, yeah, right.
Your dog is so cute.
My little Mohegan.
It's literally the dog I want. Yeah, it looks like a little black bear. How has this year been? I know we saw one another when you had just moved to Toronto, and I know you were contemplating the position at Sportsnet? I was about to say Sports Check, but that is not it. Sportsnet. I remember the conversations we were having. And so how has the past year been, despite being in a pandemic and moving to Toronto? How are you?
It's been weird, it's been weird. I'm sure you feel this, having all this success in a pandemic. And then also at the same time, in the midst of all these big, huge movements, just how quickly the world is changing. It's I'm really trying to figure out how to be humble in my success, because I know that there's so much going on in the world. But I also want to celebrate myself. It's such a really messed up space to be in. And I'm like, what is this about? What is this about? There's so many Indigenous women, just taking off, and doing so well right now. Books are selling, you got your podcast. There's just so much really dope people doing really interesting stuff out there. reclaiming, claiming, whatever it may be. But it's like this weird time, but there's all this sadness happening, and I'm still trying to figure this out, basically. And since I last seen you, things have been going really well. I kind of have my hands in a lot of things, but I'm learning so much as I'm moving through the work that I'm doing. And it's really about pulling other people up with me, and because I know there's so many talented Native producers. I'm now meeting more Afro-Indigenous filmmakers, like there's so much talent out there that I'm like, okay, I'm in these spaces, I'm in these places, all it takes is a simple email and being like, hey, there's this guy who does this work out here, this really cool Quay that does this work out here, like check them out. Maybe you want to work with them in the future, But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, there's so many things that are happening and there's so many things to celebrate, but at the same time, there's like a lot of grief happening within our communities, and there's a lot of truth coming to the surface, not only in Indigenous communities, but in Canada in general. And so I think the work that you're doing is so important, and our voices have historically been missing from all these spaces ever since Canada came into existence. And so why do you think Indigenous voices and Afro-Indigenous voices, like, why is it so important that our stories be told and to be heard on a wider scale?
Because we've been left out. Like, it's incredible to me how good we are at this, but yet we're always being shut down, and our voices are being shut down, particularly in the film and television industry, at the level that I'm going at. We have been left out. And if you really take a good look at it, there could be a human rights lawsuit against this country for the extent of how much they have left us out. And so it is critical. It is at the point where if you don't do this, you're going to get left behind. You know what I mean? If you don't listen, you're gonna get left behind. And what I mean by you're gonna get left behind is you're not gonna know what's going on. I feel like if you don't know what's going on socially and politically, like how are you supposed to make decisions in your life? It's just, anyways.
It's a lot of bypassing.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that. I sometimes just go on tangents and then
it's all good.
Just lose that tangent.
It's all connected to one another, really. And I think our voices are often missing because Canada and the state would have to take accountability for their actions and the harm that has been done to our communities. And we have to understand that this conversation isn't about just history. This is an ongoing erasure of our voices and a genocide that's still happening here. And so I know you work within a little bit of the networks. For the listeners that are unaware of who you work with, could you just give a little bit of backstory? And also, do you see change happening within these networks?
So I have experience working with broadcasters like CBC, Bell, Sportsnet, and there's still a lot of work to do. So what I've been observing is last year with the murder of George Floyd, how quick the performative stuff started happening and how quick people were like, ready to create programs for BIPOC people and all this other stuff. We're going to start listening to the voices and yada, yada, yada. And then it all ended up being performative. There was no real change happening. You look at some of the rosters of the television shows that these broadcasters are still bringing out, and like they're still majority white TV shows. You look at some of the stuff that, segments that some of these shows produce, they're only talking to white Canada. There's still this idea that we got to talk to white Canada. And it's like, hello, you're missing out on a whole population And white Canada's getting this small, just for everybody to know.
Yeah.
White Canada is becoming the minority, and might have always been, I don't know. But, you know, we're out here, and there's a generation that's coming behind me that is paying attention. And I always say that, like, they're paying attention. They're looking at who was directing, who was behind these things. They're always looking. Why? Because they're looking for themselves. And it's not just in front of the camera, it's behind everything. Like, you know, you can't deny this change. And there are people who are still sitting in positions who are going to try to do whatever they can to make this whole thing pass. And look, it's happened before. It's happened before, where movements happen and it's a trend and everybody forgets about it. It's happened before, but there's something different about this time around, because now it's on our phones. It's everywhere now. We can't run away from the truth. And that's what we all need to learn to exist in. Like, the cognitive dissonance that so many of us live in, you know, where we think we can separate ourselves from certain things happening. Like, I seen this elderly lady fall over and nobody went to go and help her. And it was like, everybody was just walking by her like, oh, well, it's none of my business. It's none of my business. Like, what? So as soon as I went to go and help her, that's when everybody else started surrounding, you know what I mean? And it's like, no, she fell right in front of you. In that moment, you should have picked her up. I shouldn't have had to run across the street to help her.
Literally.
But that's that whole thing. It's like, well, it's none of my business, none of my business. No, take the time to care. Take the time to, what if that was your grandmother? What if that was your grandfather? Take the time to care. And it's the same thing for these broadcasters and media and film and television. Is take the time to listen, take the time to work. I don't know what it is, Shayla, but I swear, as soon as my experience being in spaces where as soon as a Native woman speaks, everybody just gets like scared and automatically shuts down.
Yeah.
And it's
that's how I felt.
You probably know.
Yeah. It's interesting because I don't know what it is. Like you're saying, it's cognitive dissonance. I feel like because we have been left out of these conversations so much, it's almost like people think, like we're intimidating or like we hate everyone. And it's just like, no, we just like haven't been a part of this and we just like want to be a part of the world. Like, I'm not hating on you, but the fact that you're treating me like this now, like, I don't know, it's making me feel weird now. So I totally get what you're saying.
Exactly.
And I know you work like with the networks and writing, and for me, I cannot not look at some mainstream media as just like programming and conditioning. And because really it's running on the same like narratives and the same people are writing the same stuff. And so do you feel like there is a limit to what people can talk about when it comes to these networks? Is there censorship that happens behind the scenes, or are they giving you the tools for you to actually tell the truth?
No, of course there's censorship. There's absolute censorship. And I mean, some people are able to be in spaces where they can, you know, speak that capital T truth, you know, it's not to say that it's not out there. But there is absolute, censorship. There is, you know, I've worked in spaces where, you know, I want to create a segment or I'm doing an interview and I've been told, well, as long as you don't talk about the police, as long as you don't talk about the police, it's like, why would you even say that? Like, and it would be interviews about my book, which is about self-love. Like, why would you just assume that I'm going to do an interview about and talk about the police? Like, it's there. Of course, there is a lot of censorship. And one of the things that I'm really understanding about this industry is that everything that we're getting is through the white lens. Everything. And there are a lot of POC producers and people who work in these spaces, even people like myself who have been mentored by white people, white men, white women. And so even our training is still through the white lens. You know what I mean? And so I'm learning what does the white gaze mean? There's this really dope book by Rebecca Carroll called Surviving the White Gaze. Everybody should read that book. She's biracial, and she was raised by a white family. She was adopted out by a white mother to a white family. And so she basically talks about how her whole life, the white people around her basically tried to take away her Blackness in all these different weird ways, shapes, and forms. And so it's one of the things that I see in media, and I kept relating that to media. It's like, as soon as you go into something that is like inspirational for us or good for us, there almost seems to be like this, like, but we want to pull this back and like bring you back into your trauma. You know, it's like, if you're gonna show our trauma, which is there's a lot of truth in that, also show our joy.
Exactly.
You know? Also show our joy, because our joy is the truth too, you know, and show us in who we are. Like, settlers have been here for so long that I'm here. You know? Like my dad came here to go to school in Brandon, Manitoba, and that's how he met my mom. My dad's from Tanzania, Africa. So, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that relationship. So showcase that we're also diverse within our own community, you know, and
exactly
what that looks like, what that relationship is like, because then you're keeping us in this like narrative that is like from the 1800s, when we're here, we're modern, we're traditional, we're Black, we're Native, we're this, we're that. Like, we're all these different things.
Yeah, there's so many intersections to our identities within Indigenous communities, and knowing that there is still a lot that needs to be worked on, even in our own Indigenous communities, around anti-Blackness and like transphobia.
Yeah.
What do you think like non-Black Natives need to start doing, if you want to speak on that at all? Because there has been a lot of dialogue happening around the lack of Afro-Indigenous voices in these spaces.
Absolutely. And I am so glad. I'm almost 40. I have been waiting for this conversation, okay, my whole entire life. And so I'm just excited that we're starting this conversation, and that this conversation is happening, because what I've learned in my journey is where the change starts is through dialogue. And what I would want to say to our non-Black relatives is existing in these. I've always been raised. So I grew up in a big, huge Afro-Indigenous family. So there's maybe 12 women in the family, and then about 6 of them have kids with Black men. And so there's like a big group of us who are half Black, and then there's a big group of them that are like full-blooded Native, and then there's like a group that's like mixed with like Asian, Iraqi. There's even some Middle Eastern in my family. Like there's a rainbow. Like when I'm gonna sidetrack a little bit, but when I always share this story, whenever we have family barbecues in the summer, and people walk by, they'll be like, "Is this a community barbecue?" Because our family just looks so diverse. You know what I mean?
You're like, no, you're not invited.
But we're all here. Like, we're all here. And, you know, I always think about the Native moms raising Black children. And because I have such compassion for my mom, you know, because I can only imagine what it was like, first off, having this world that is just completely racist against you. And then you're also raising 2 Black children, and I can only imagine the look she's gotten, the things that were said to her, you know, like I think about those women, and I think it's important for our community to also think about those women and those men that are raising us, right? You're basically saying to other community members that their children don't matter, that they're not Native enough, or that, you know what I mean? Like, it's devastating. I'm not a parent, but I know what it's like to care for children, and I can only imagine if I went to my community and my community didn't accept my kids. Like,
Yeah.
what? That's not okay. That's not okay.
I think it's a direct reflection of like the effects of colonization, even within our own communities, of
Yes.
like when blood quantum came into existence, and then like who's native enough and who's not. I know, people just getting questioning on that is just mind blowing, because we're already dealing with so much racism in modern day society, and now we got to deal with it within our own communities where we should be
Exactly.
accepted and loved and supported. So I can imagine the layers. And you mentioned your mom, and I think, holding our mothers and our grandmothers and our matriarchs in really high regard and respect. If you could define, like this has been like, I feel like the foundation of a lot of Indigenous communities is our matriarchs. And so I'm curious to know, how would you define the word matriarch, and are there matriarchs that you are currently inspired by?
Oh, every day, Shayla. Every day you see how great our community is. Like, oh my gosh, how could you not go on Instagram and not be inspired? Like it's incredible. But I think about my mom, and I think about my aunties, and I think about the women in my community that have uplifted me and supported me in whatever it is that I like. Even even the matriarch who, so I used to live in the west end of Winnipeg, and if you walk down Sargent Avenue as a young girl back in the 90s, you would get harassed. And I remember as a kid, it was always Native women and Black women that were like, leave that young girl alone. She's just trying to go to school. So I always think about those women, like the women who are just like, that knew, okay, that's a young girl, like leave her the hell alone. And, mama buried me while I'm trying to get my butt to school. Like those are the women that I think about.
Yeah, we definitely need all of those women in our life protecting us. And you mentioned at the beginning, you grew up in Winnipeg. What was that experience like for you? Because Winnipeg is like the most racist city in Canada, isn't it? To Indigenous people?
I would say the prairies in general is pretty racist. It's the prairies is bad. I'm still trying to figure out how to understand this. And I feel like through my artwork, I'll be able to, like, you know what I mean? But growing up, there was always something going on, And I always remember there was like the Vietnamese community over there, and then you had the Native community over here, and then within our community there was like these brothers that lived in this house, and you kind of knew where everybody lived. That's why that's why we call it a big urban reserve. Like you just you know which shortcuts you can go through. Dan's over there drinking, and he's probably, I don't know, doing some weird shit. And then there's the guy over there with the cut off tongue with his, his homeless cart. Like it's such a very interesting place, and there's so much story there that the rest of this country hasn't seen or heard. It's crazy, but it's beautiful. It's racist, but it's beautiful. The community over there, like the activism, the protests. Oh man, that's probably the one thing I miss being away from home is the community. It's such a beautiful place. It's besides all the stuff that happens.
Yeah, because I've only visited like a couple times, and I remember a Native person like being called out of the bay while I was in there. He was like getting rushed out or something, and I just experienced, like, even in that just blimp of a moment, racism within that city. But I also realized that there is a lot of community and support and activism happening there. And it brings me up to this idea of like Indigenous futurism. Like, can we imagine our lives outside of these colonial systems, or outside of what we have known to be like racist our entire life. When you think of Indigenous futurism or Afro-Indigenous futurism, how do you want the future to look?
Oh, I love futurism. I like futurism all day, every day. It looks like land back. It looks like settler Canada building relations with us, like actual genuine relations with us. Moving here, I'm like taking a good look at like the city and the way it's structured. But there's like a lot of different like places, like you have Jamaica Town, you have Chinatown, Little Italy. And I think, what relations have these communities built with our communities? You know, like I don't know because I don't live here, you know, but these are just questions that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does building those relationships with us look like? And what does that mean? It also looks like giving us the resources and space to do what we need to do as a community to basically restore what's been taken and ruined. And you know what I mean? Like I'm thinking about Toronto. Like I love this city, but it's very concrete. And I feel sorry for people, especially if they don't get to go out into like nature and stuff like that. And this is all they're around all day, every day. They haven't sat by a fire ever in their life. They haven't ever put their feet on like, you know, beautiful soil. Like I'm like, you're missing out. You don't even know you're missing out. And so I really hope, and especially after COVID, that we start to learn to go back to the land, that we start to develop a relationship with the land, and a healthy relationship with the land.
That's so essential.
Exactly. And also futurism looks like letting people like myself create all the TV shows and whatever it is that they want.
Seriously. The stories, I would maybe start watching TV more and Netflix and like actually download a series for once.
I hope the streamers are listening.
Right? Well, that brings me up to like another point to touch on is like, do you think we can actually like decolonize a colonial system, or should we just be building our own? Because you mentioned like if you have power and privilege, sometimes we just need the resources to like create our own. So do you think it's possible to decolonize something that is a colonial entity?
I don't know. I honestly, there was an energy in me last year that felt like there was a possibility of that happening, but just watching the way people respond and people like, okay, so I'm literally watching the way people responded after the murder of George Floyd respond to the unmarked concentration graves. It's interesting, and I'm like, okay, so we're here again. You know, like it's all of a sudden people get performative. People want to commodify. Like Black and Indigenous trauma is a commodification to the rest of the world. It's insane to me. So I've just over the weekend that's when I started to like really sit and process everything, because it's interesting because during the week, you know, it's almost like we're asked to process things the way society is moving, and it takes me days to really process things. And by Sunday, I found myself just angry, and I was like, everybody's just reacting. Everybody's being performative. You see people who I know have never worked in the community or ever done anything for the community selling orange shirts. And it's like, I don't know. I really don't know.
It goes a lot deeper than that. I know there's a lot of conversations on like Cancel Canada Day, and I'm like, well, I haven't been celebrating for years, first of all, and like it's gonna take a lot more. It's gonna take a lot more than canceling one day. Like it's pretty much like the entire foundation that Canada has been built upon. And even I have been saying like yes and no to like a few interviews, and it's just like, Indigenous people have been educating for the longest time. If you want resources, they are already out there. I mean, at what point is it like, do we stop? Like, history is important, obviously, but at what point do we start like fixing the problems and all the problems that we keep talking about? Like, everyone's just talking with no real action, I find.
Yeah, and it's all there's a lot of history-based conversation, and it's like, no, I'm right here in front of you. I'm alive. Hello.
Yeah.
You know, like, I'm right here.
And I think even the talk around like genocide, like people fail to recognize like this is something that's still happening in Canada. This isn't a thing of just the past. Like, our communities lack clean drinking water, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit crisis. Like, this is an ongoing thing. And so at what time do we start to like actually do something about it? And so I'm interested to know like your perspective of what do you think non-Indigenous people have to do in order to actually start to seek change here in Canada?
I think they have to get real about their racism. And that's not just white Canada. That's other settler Canada too. I've been in spaces, so many spaces where people don't know I'm Native and will say some racist shit. And I have to like, excuse you, and it can get really ugly, And I remember I met an elderly Black man, and in the neighborhood, I always used to see him around in the West End of Winnipeg. And I finally one day just sat with him. And he said to me, he's like, Adeline, you don't know what our government is saying to these people when they're in these workshops, because I guess when immigrants come here, they got to go through these like workshops or whatever. He's like, you don't know what they're telling those people. And I interviewed a young woman when I was podcasting, and she was telling me, a young Jamaican woman, she was telling me how when her mom immigrated here back in the 70s, she was basically told that if a Native person comes up to your car and says this is their land, don't believe them. So like, there's such a deep embedded, do you know what I mean? It's so deep in all of us. It's important that everybody check their anti-indigeneity, check it. Like, it's in everybody. It's just like anti-Blackness, right? It's in everybody. It comes out. We have all been existing with these lenses. You know what I mean? We've been programmed by so much. And it's okay to be like, yo, I don't know. Yeah. Okay. That was racist. Okay. Oh, damn. I messed up. Let's move forward. That's the only way. It's sort of like, I remember I had somebody say to me, well, I don't understand why I have to say LGBTQ Two-Spirit. That's long. Why do I have to say that? And it's like, well, this is what this particular community is asking of you. So, this is, just do it. Just do it. It's out of respect. If you have to say they, if you have to ask someone their pronoun, do it.
Exactly.
Like, so if our community is out here saying, listen, check your racism, just do it.
Right? I know. I was listening to this one girl talk. Her name's Mariam Hasna, and she says, like, what's happening in humanity right now is there's this call to righteousness. This is their call to always feeling right. And it's like about your ego. And it's just like, sometimes we need to let that down and like be open to unlearning and listening and dismantling, like you're saying, the colonial programming and conditioning that we have been habitually running on for decades. And so I know that you do a lot of work taking up space and using your voice in these spaces. And I want to know, like, when you're feeling, overwhelmed or lethargic or, just depleted, what are ways that you reclaim your power and stand in your truth and your authenticity?
Well, I used to go to ceremony in Palo Alto, but I don't anymore. Well, not anymore, but, since COVID. But hopefully I'll be able to go to ceremony this summer in August. But outside of that, because, I'm in a modern world, I'm a modern girl. I do yoga. I meditate. Like, I wish more people would meditate. I do a lot of prayer. I have a really amazing support group of Indigenous film cousins. We call each other.
Sweet.
And so when big things happen within the industry, we come together and just talk about it and, talk about the things that are bothering us. And I don't know, I don't think I've ever had like the sort of spaces I have since COVID hit. Like I have some really amazing spaces. People have really come together.
That's awesome that you have a support system that you can rely on, even just to get like feedback. I feel like sometimes it feels like we're going at this alone, but having that support system is like so essential to like your mental health and your mental well-being. And what would your advice be for like the younger generation out there who maybe is scared to use their voice or doesn't know where to begin to start writing or producing or directing?
My advice would be to try everything, like if you want to use your voice to paint, if that's like a outlet you want to explore it. If you want to start a podcast, do that. If you want to produce an online book or whatever it is, like there's so many outlets. Like one of the things I used to find, people would always say to me, well, I don't know what you do. I don't even understand what you're doing. I don't get what you do. And it's like, I'm just trying to figure this out. There's no one way of doing this, not just filmmaking, not just producing. I'm talking about life.
Yeah.
There's no one way to do life. I would have never thought I would have gone from podcasting to working in radio to working in TV. Like I would have never thought that. But what ended up happening was all of my skills, even I'm a social worker. Academically, I'm a social worker. So I've spent years working in social services and advocating. So that's where my advocacy part comes from. But all these skills, eventually, everything that you start to collect as you go along will all start to intertwine and make sense. Because you're not doing this for nothing. We're not here for nothing.
Totally.
We're not just born to pay bills and you know what I mean? Like we're born to do things. And especially as Anishinaabe people, we are manifestors, like traditionally, spiritually, we're manifestors. We're here to create. We're here to do, and it's something, some people are like, yeah, I started beading and I just was so good at it. I don't understand why I'm just naturally good at it. It's like, well, it's in your DNA,
Right? I was just talking to Monday. Do you know Monday?
Yes.
She's dropping an Afro-Indigenous line. She said, yeah, like it wasn't my intention to become a beater. I'm like, well, you just dropped the whole line. Like, so it's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, just allow yourself to go.
Literally. Yeah, because you have done so much. I know you've also written a book.
Yes.
Could you mention to listeners a little bit about your book? I know we haven't touched on that yet. And I'm curious to know about the process and the commitment that it took to writing that book and then having it isn't it in Walmart or somewhere?
In the States. So it's doing really well in the States.
Sweet.
It's so funny because I wrote that book back in 2016, I think, a long time ago. And it was selling, small bits. And then COVID hit, and then all of a sudden the sales started going up. But what's so interesting about that particular book is I wrote it in a time when the murder of what's his name? I can see him in my brain with the black hoodie.
I'm blanking, but I think I know who you're talking about.
That sucks that I can't remember. But it was during that time when there was like a bunch of shootings and the murder of Tina Fontaine. There was all this stuff happening. And I'm very much a person who, like, when things like that happen in the world, like even when the first announcement of the 215, like my brain, like I go into this like space of like sadness. I need to process this. And then like this, like, okay, what can I do? How do I utilize all this information to create change and do the work that I need to do? How do I place this into the stories I'm trying to tell? Like there's this other side of me. And so when all this stuff was happening, it was like every single day I was logging onto my Facebook and somebody was going missing. somebody was being found, someone was being shot by the police on Facebook, like just ridiculous, like just crazy. Like it was, I remember just like, I didn't want to log on to Facebook because it was like, what the hell is next?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, what is the one thing that has helped me? And that's finding self-love and learning to love myself. And it changes, you know, every time I get older. Like one of the things I wish I would have wrote about in that book is how self-love transforms into community love, you know? And I also use the word woman of color, which we've now evolved from, right? Like not everybody identifies as a woman of color, you know? So there's all this stuff that when I look at that book, I'm like, holy crap, we've come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
But I wrote that book just because I just wanted to create something good for the world. Like that was all my intention.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first started writing it and I was sharing it, oh my God, people were like, oh, why are you writing a book for women of color? Don't you know white women follow you too? And I'm like, this is why we can't have anything for ourselves, because every single time. And so making sure that like it said women of color and then having my black face on the cover was really important.
Yeah.
It's really, really important.
Well, and I think like self-love as like a person of color is like a radical act in itself, because we have been told that we are unlovable and that we're not worthy and that we don't deserve to be in this space. And so it's a radical act itself, like self-love. And like you're saying, it ties back into kinship and it ties back to our communities, which I think is essential right now. And so my next question is, when are you dropping your next book?
I hope soon. Shayla, I hope soon. You know what? I really hope that I can build myself to a point where I can just produce my books on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like sort of do things myself. I'm done trying to collaborate with you know, publications and stuff like that. Like I would love to get to a place where I can even have my own publication company and then start producing books for other people, maybe other Afro-Indigenous kin, other Indigenous kin, whoever, you know, has a really dope story and wants to write a book. Like I'm trying to build my own little empire.
Yeah, build that legacy.
Build my own little empire so that I can just do this, you know, and just create my own stuff without having to sit in meetings with people and explain things to people.
Waiting for it.
Yeah, it's getting tiring. It's like, really, I don't get how I have to, like, I'm going to say this again. I'm almost 40 and I still have to like prove myself. Are you kidding me? Like, no, I've been here long enough.
Mm-hmm. I really got to read that book, The White Gaze, because I feel like that's constantly why we're having to prove ourselves.
Yes.
Is for the white gaze. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I definitely got to read that book. But not to get off track, but for the rest of 2021, I know you have your hands in many projects. What do you have on the horizon for 2021?
Well, I haven't even like made this public because I just had this meeting before coming on this podcast. But myself, Amber Daniels, and Asia Youngman just got a half-hour dramedy in development with Amazon called The Audacity.
Yay! That's so exciting. Congrats.
Thank you. So it's a half-hour series around 4 Indigenous women navigating urban life. We have one character who just moves to the city from the res for the first time and is going to cosmetology, and there's another Indigenous woman character who is a successful producer and a broadcaster. So they're all like, you know, women like ourselves with careers, you know, just navigating what we navigate basically. And so I'm really excited because I'm one of the things I've been really trying to push is seeing Afro-Indigenous on television and our narrative on television. And so we have a few Afro-Indigenous characters.
Sweet.
Who I'm excited to, put out there. Like I'm really excited. I'm just really excited for Indian country, and I'm excited to be a part of this project with Amber Daniels, who's a freaking amazing Indigenous TV writer, and Asia Youngman, who is an amazing, and I'm not just saying this because they're my friends and I'm partners with them. They actually are. You can check them out. Asia Youngman, who's a director, super brilliant women. Like,
yeah,
so
that's exciting. It's about time too.
Right, and it's a comedy. That's the best part. It's a comedy. We need more of that. We're just naturally funny. I interviewed Jenna Schmeiding from Rutherford Falls last week, Friday, and she's the main character from Rutherford Falls, and she was telling me how she's like, this is my first time doing any of this. She's like, I don't have any experience being a TV writer or acting on screen like this. Like, this is all new to me. And she's like, I never was around comedy as a kid, but the women around me were funny.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's true. Like,
yeah.
I don't think I'm funny, but I know the women around me are hella funny.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. We definitely need more joy and like comedies in our life, literally.
Yeah, exactly.
Where can people support your work moving forward, and your handles and everything that you've got going on?
Well, I honestly, Instagram and Facebook, I have a website, but I'm still working on it. If you just connect with me on Instagram, that's usually where I try to keep up with things, at Adeline_Bird. And then I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I hope to soon. I don't know. I need to be a little bit more active on social media. I'm just like, I don't know how. What am I going to post? That I'm writing? That I'm in another meeting?
Yeah. Just your rant of the day. Story time, maybe some comedy. You could get the comedy going. Unfiltered.
Start going from there. Yeah, right.
And your book, where can people buy your book?
Oh, it's available on Amazon in Canada. And I think that's it in Canada. And in the United States, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, and Amazon. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you. Hi so much for being here, for sharing your story, for sharing your wisdom. I can't wait to see
for having me.
What you get up to. And yeah, make sure you follow Adeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Shayla. Keep up the amazing work.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at Matriarch.Movement. And don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice, and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.